Chapter 22 of The Autobiography of a Newspaper Girl by Elizabeth L. Banks. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22 The Love Story of Miss Johnstone, Journalist. In the first corner, facing the entrance door of the city room, sat the city editor of the Daily Bugle, his desk piled high with telegrams, proof sheets, and first editions of the rival papers. At the sides and in the middle of the room were arranged other desks, somewhat smaller and less important looking, as became the subordinate positions of the men behind them. Long tables, besplashed with ink, and with blue pencils continually rolling from them to the floor, were surrounded by young men, turning out page after page of manuscripts, and smoking their pipes the while. The office boys were running hither and thither, as the cry of "Copy! Copy!" rang out from different parts of the room, grabbing from the writers a page here and a page there, darting upstairs to the press room, then back again, with hands full of proof sheets, to be distributed over desks and tables. At the farthest corner from the door, where there was an attempt at separation from the rest of the room by a couple of Japanese screens, there were signs of femininity in the shape of a smart fur cape hanging on the wall beside a cheap little looking-glass, depending from a nail by a string. A nobby hat with a green velvet bow and a red feather, a spotted veil in a high heap, a pair of gloves, and a silver-handled umbrella had been thrown carelessly down upon the back part of the roll-top desk. "Miss Johnstone, the city editor wants you quick," called out one of the small boys, stopping on his way to the press room with his hands full of corrected proofs. "All right, Bobby," came the answer from behind the screens, and then the occupant of the exclusive corner could be seen as she rose from behind the high desk. She was what would be called a tailor-made girl, of 22 or possibly 25. The men in the office spoke of her as being "something on looks," meaning thereby that she was not unattractive, that she carried herself well, and dressed in a style that they denominated "smooth." She was not tall, so she wore her hair done high to keep from appearing too insignificant. She had a good figure, so she affected tailor-made gowns, which showed it off. She had not much color in her cheeks, therefore she wore a bright red necktie, knotted in the fashionable mode, which appeared to give a ruddiness to her face. It was not exactly what could be called a sympathetic face. Once it might have been, but now it was rather one that had been schooled to stolidity and concealment by a necessity which knew no sentimental law. Surely not out of the abundance of the heart dared the mouth nor the face of this woman speak. Her long green cloth skirts, with their silky rustle, swept over the floor among the pieces of waste paper, flimsy, and broken lead pencils. "Bobby said you wanted me," she said to the city editor when she had reached his desk. "Oh, yes, I do," he responded without looking up. He was critically examining some typewritten copy, and drawing his blue pencil mercilessly through words, sentences, and sometimes whole pages of it. "Yes, I want you," he repeated as the girl stood waiting. "Hello, Bobby! Here, fire this upstairs, and tell them it's to go into the early edition," he called out, throwing the bundle of sheets into the outstretched hands of the boy who hurried towards him. Then the editor continued blue penciling other pages, as he said, still without looking up from his work, "It's not in your line, I know, but I've got to ask you to do a funeral, a lying in state, floral tributes and so on. What with that murder over in the East and being head over ears in political work and that city corruption expose, I haven't a man I can spare for this thing. So do your best with it, will you? And don't try to get anything humorous or even bright and catchy into your account of the affair, as you are wont to do in everything you handle, though of course I've never tried you on funerals." He added this, half bantering, half kindly, as though to let the girl know he was not complaining. John Black, the young politician, died suddenly last night. He was one of our particular protégés, you might say, so we want to give the poor chap a good send-off, now he's gone. You know of him, of course? Sharp as a whip, but good as gold. Rising young fellow. If he'd lived he'd been senator, governor, and even president, or I'd missed my guess. Just go to his mother's house this afternoon. Take a train. It's out in the suburbs, and here's the address. About 7 o'clock would be a good time, I should say. There ought to be plenty of floral tributes by that time. Get all the names, you understand, and then—" "Yes, I understand exactly what you want," interrupted the young woman, as though in a hurry to conclude the interview. "And I have no idea that I shall see anything humorous in the situation. If I should happen to, I promise you I shall not put it into the paper." As she said this, she was leaving the editor's desk, when he resumed. "Oh, say, Miss Johnstone, will you allow a mere man to make a suggestion to you? Would you mind changing that flaring red necktie for something a little more somber when you go to poor Black's house this afternoon? I've always found it paid for women reporters, and men too, for that matter, to bear in mind these little diplomacies. Look as quiet and unobtrusive as you can when you go. You may run across his mother or some of his relations who will talk for publication." A slight nod and a murmured "Very well" was the answer. Once back at her desk, Miss Johnstone dived deep into her cape pocket for her purse and emptied its contents in front of her. 87 cents, she said to herself, and it's Thursday. I've already drawn $10 on account of this week's salary, and I dare not ask for any more in advance. Money, money, how can I get it? Suddenly she pulled out some copy paper and began to write. "This is the only way," she murmured. "A column for the humorist, and collect on delivery." Page after page passed from under her pen. Then, clipping a dozen sheets together, she read them over, made a correction here, an addition or an omission there, laughed grimly, as though pleased with her work, pushed back her chair, and left the room. The Humorist was a weekly paper, published by the same proprietor as the Daily Bugle, though of course under altogether different editorial management. A number of the regular members of the Bugle staff were among the contributors to the weekly periodical, and were paid for that work at space rates, so that they were thus able to add materially to their weekly salaries. Miss Johnstone was among the funny paper's most valued contributors, and often, when work was slack in the city room of the Bugle, she occupied herself with turning out tales for the delectation of the humorist's readers. A little private arrangement existed between her and the editor, by which she was paid immediately on the delivery of her manuscript, and when she now entered his office with a parcel of paper in her hand, he exclaimed, "What, broke again? Well, let's read your stuff." Throughout the reading, the man smiled the pleased smile of the editor who finds himself in the possession of a scoop that no hated rival has any means of obtaining. "It's great!" he exclaimed, when he had finished. "I like it better than any political caricature you've ever done for me. I declare," he went on, with an insinuating grin on his face, "you must have a pull with some garrulous statesman, or you wouldn't be able to get hold of these stories." An order for $10 passed from the editor to Miss Johnstone, who, with a hurried "Thank you, you're a friend in need," left the office. She had donned her hat and cape before leaving her desk, and after stopping at the cashier's office, the doors of the great building swung behind her, and she passed into the street, which was rapidly filling with men and women going to luncheon from the various offices. She was passed by numerous street cars, but neglected to hail them. As she walked rapidly along, her shoulders back, her head erect, a woman whispered to a companion in the crowd, "Look, there goes that Miss Johnstone of the Bugle. They say her salary's something immense. Of all the unsympathetic, cold-looking faces I ever saw, Hers is the worst. I wouldn't be surprised to know that ice water, and never a drop of blood, ran in her veins." Miss Johnstone halted before a florist's window. "I want a wire frame, the kind they use for making wreaths," she said, when she had entered the shop. "Now some Jack roses. Give me some buds as well as full-blown roses. No, I don't want any green, except the rose leaves. $8, you say?" She passed over the $10 bill, and taking the $2 change and the parcels of flowers and wire, turned again into the street, then round a corner, then into a lofty red brick building made up of flats. It was a pretty, dainty, feminine-looking room into which the girl entered. Bright draperies, soft cushions, pictures on the walls, easy chairs, books, and magazines, a small piano with specimens of the latest popular music scattered about it, all proclaimed the artistic, well-paid American professional woman. Flower vases filled with roses, such as the girl had just bought from the florist's, were on the tables and the mantel. The room was heated by pipes, after the American fashion, but as she seated herself upon the velvet carpet, with the roses and the wire frame, she shivered, and sharply shut her teeth together to keep them from chattering. Then among the roses deftly flew her fingers, carrying them to the wire frame one by one, till only a circlet of crimson loveliness lay finally in her lap. "Copy! Copy! Proof sheet! Proof sheet!" rang out upon the smoky midnight air of the Daily Bugle office. "Where's that headline I just wrote? Here, take it upstairs and tell them it's to be used with Miss Johnstone's account of John Black's death, which she'll have ready to send up in a few minutes. What's that, Miss Johnstone? Oh, you've got the first 5 pages done already? Good. Here then, Bobby, take the headline and this part of the stuff up together, and say the rest will be done in 10 minutes." Miss Johnstone bent over her desk, writing, her face white, but as immobile and as incomprehensible as ever. "Miss Johnstone, the night editor wants to know if you brought back from the village a photograph of John Black. He thinks we'd better use a picture, even if we have to cut down the write-up to make room for it." One of the copy readers stood at her desk speaking. "What did you say? Oh, a photograph? Yes, I did, or at least I think I brought it away with me. It was a little picture. Go away a minute, so I'll have room to move about and hunt for it among my papers." Miss Johnstone took out her purse, and with trembling fingers felt among the compartments, till she pulled forth a small photograph, evidently cut down to make it go into the purse. It was somewhat soiled, as though from much handling. "Here is the photograph," she said, handing it over to the copy reader. "I have written on the back that it's to be returned to me without fail, as I am responsible for it, and here is the rest of the copy, and I think my day's work is done." She got up slowly, donned her hat and cape, and as she left the desk, a large black Newfoundland dog crawled from under it and followed her from the room. "I never saw that dog before," said one of the men to the night editor, "but he went after her as though he'd belonged to her all his life. He looks like a knowing and valuable animal, and it's queer she never spoke of him, even as she went out." "Speak!" reiterated the night editor, throwing a bundle of flimsy onto the floor. "Miss Johnstone isn't one of the speaking kind. She's been here 4 years, and nobody but myself ever so much as knew she had a family to support." "You don't mean to say she's married?" exclaimed the other editor in surprise. "Married? Certainly not. She's got an invalid mother, a little brother, and a sister about 17 who goes to boarding school, to support, besides herself to keep. How the devil could a girl like that get married if she wanted to?" "Well, her salary and all the extra she makes on the humorist wouldn't be too much to do all that on," returned the other. "But what puzzles me is where that animal came from, how he got into the office." "Oh, I can enlighten you that much," said the night editor. I saw him come in with her when she came back to do her writing, and he went under the desk and waited till she got through. As they passed my desk I said, 'Fine dog that, is he yours?' And she said, 'Certainly,' with such a fierce look in her eyes that I didn't think I was expected to say anything more." While this conversation was going on, Miss Johnstone was walking home to her flat, the dog at her side. "Here, Comfort, we are home now," she said, as she turned into the lighted entrance to the flat building, and the dog followed her in. A few years ago, a visitor to the little village of , which is a few miles out from one of the largest of our American cities, was looking through the beautiful little cemetery attached to the newly painted wooden church. "Yes," said the old man who tended the graves and kept the grass cut, as he showed the visitor through, "it's as pretty a little cemetery as I ever see, and there's folks buried here as this town not only loved and respected, but as was more than common in intellect. See that there grave over there with the red roses on it? They're ruther faded now, it being the last of the week, but on a Sunday there'll be another bunch bright and fresh. Oh, I could tell ye the tale of them roses." "What tale?" said the visitor, "and who is buried there?" "Well, ye see, we had a young townsman by the name of Black, John Black, to speak by the book, and he war a great orator and politician, and a member of the state legislator. He was brought up amongst us, and he was that anxious after larnin' that he sawed wood in the summer time to get money to pay for schoolin' in the winter, and he got through the state university that way, and supported his old mother into the bargain. He tuck to law and then to politics, and afore he war 30 he'd made a stir, and there warn't nobody that didn't believe he'd be sent to Congress, and after a while git to be president, just as soon as he got old enough. Well, the campaign of 18 , you remember what a tough thing that was over in , of course? John Black took a great interest in that, and he tuck off his coat and went to work to defeat the other fellers, and he made 10 and 12 speeches a day. He rushed first from one meetin' and then to another, and always with his black dog along with him, which war a mighty intelligent beast, and used to set on the platform with Black, and bark fit to kill when his master got through and the folks was a cheerin' him. He tuck great stock in that dog, did Black, and called him by the name of Comfort. Well, poor John Black, he fell down with a stroke of apoplexy, and died just as he was goin' to a meetin' of his party, and that war a hard day for this village, and he had such a funeral and layin' out as a governor might be proud of. Flowers was sent from all over, and delegations from all the big towns came on, and John Black was buried as befitted the great man he was, and the greater man that he could a been. O' course, there were lots of reporters from the big papers sent down to write about the funeral, and as we afterwards larned, there were a young woman reporter from the Daily Bugle, a paper that set great stock by John Black, and him by it too, that went to the house and made a particular request to go into the front room alone where the corpse was, as she said she could do her work better if she war alone, and she wanted to write down names and make a picture of all the flowers or somethin'. They let her do as she liked, and besides, the rest of the reporters hadn't begun to come yet, and she was in the room something about 3/4 of an hour. Late that night they couldn't find the dog nowhere, though John Black's cousin, what let the young woman into the room, said the dog was under the trestle where the coffin was when she went in, and she couldn't get him to go out, and his howlin' was that pitiful when they tried to drag him away, they hadn't the heart to do it. They found a wreath of red roses pushed way down to the foot inside the coffin, and they didn't know how it got there, and some was for taking it out, as red flowers wasn't suitable for the dead, but only white, but nobody seemed to dast take it out, and John Black was buried with 'em on his feet, the same as they was left. Black's mother went out of her head, and died in a few days, and after that the story got round, I don't know exactly how, that the young woman reporter from the Daily Bugle was Black's sweetheart, and they was waiting to get some more money afore they could get married, Black having his mother to support, and so they kept the matter quiet. Some of the villagers said they remembered seeing her and John Black going riding in a sleigh in the winter time, and they always tuck the dog along, and another man said he see Black and the gal and the dog eating dinner in a restaurant. "It was the young woman reporter that put the wreath in the coffin and took the dog then?" asked the visitor. "Yes," returned the old grave tender. "But the sorrowful thing, to my mind, is this. They say the young woman she seed Black at her office the very afternoon before he died, and she never knowed a thing about his death till her editor told her to go out and report a funeral, tellin' her John Black had died sudden like, and the editor he didn't know neither that John Black was anything to the young woman, and she was a quiet, close-mouthed sort of woman, so she never so much as cried out when she heard it, and she went and made a wreath and brought it with her, and she wrote up the laying out for her paper, just the same as if her heart wasn't a breakin', and never told nobody at the newspaper office a word about it. The dog, he knowed her, and followed her out of the French winder that opened onto the piazzer, and when Black's cousin went to see if the young woman were through with her writin' and drawin', her and the dog war gone, as I said. It's a couple of years now and more, but every Sunday the young woman comes out to the cemetery with a lot of roses, and puts 'em on the grave, and she brings the dog along of her, and they sits by the grave a while and then goes away. The village florist, he says the roses is what you call Jack roses, and a kind John Black always bought plenty of every week when he was alive, and carried 'em to the city with him. I s'pose he took 'em to the young woman. I used to think the young woman had a hard face which warn't exactly lovin' when I seen her come on a Sundays, but once, about 10 o'clock at night, I come through the graveyard as a short cut home, and the moon was up, and I see her and the dog settin' by Black's grave. I watched a while, and she put her head down on the grave and clawed at it with her fingers, and then the dog he scratched and whined, and the young woman kep' a sayin', 'Oh, Jack, Jack, if it wasn't for the rest of 'em that I have to look after, I'd come to you with comfort, but I must stay here, Jack, to take care of 'em all.' They say as how she's got a sick mother and other folks to support, and when I see that and heard her a cryin' so pitiful, I knowed how it war. It's what you'd call a sorrowful tale, this here, ain't it?" And the old grave tender went his way. End of chapter 22.